Hello. In this course, we're going to be talking about the feed and nutrition of layers and laying hens. So, nutrients are split up into two different categories. We have the macronutrients and we have micronutrients. Both play a very important role in the diet. The macronutrients are the proteins, fat, and carbohydrates, while micronutrients are your vitamins and minerals. So, it's important to meet both the macro and the micronutrient requirements in your feed. So for laying hens, we're looking for a specific nutrient requirements to meet what the laying hens need. So in this slide, I've listed just like the common nutrients that I'm looking for whenever I formulate a layer ration. So usually we're looking for about a 16 to 17% protein, 1,280 kilocalories per pound. We've got a little bit more calcium. So this is 3.5 to 4% calcium to help with eggshell quality and to help with eggshells and eggshell quality. And then we have our methionine, lysine, and threonine levels, which are all amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So your protein source is only as good as your amino acid profile. So if any of these amino acids are too low in the diet, it can affect your lay rate and your egg size and quality. We're also looking for specific vitamin levels. Also, vitamins are really important for different functions throughout the body and largely contribute to the health of the overall animal. So when you're purchasing a layer feed, these are some numbers that you might want to look at. Mind you, all feed tags might not have all of this information on there, but depending on the feed and feed mill that you're getting the feed from, they should be able to give you a little bit more information. Now, keep in mind that the goal for your laying hen and the feed that you're getting for them is to lay eggs. So, and preferably having a higher lay rate and egg production. So if you're not achieving that, then there are some issues, and you might need to reevaluate what you're feeding and what's going on your farm. I do want to mention that this is a layer feed. So this is the feed to be fed whenever they've started laying. So usually around 16 to 18 weeks when they start laying is whenever you would switch them over to the layer feed. This should not be fed from day one. So if you're buying in your pullets from day old chicks, then you're going to want to feed them a starter feed for roughly from day one to about week 6. And then you can switch them over to a grower feed, which you would keep them on until they start laying eggs. But this standard layer feed is not for their from day one until they start laying, because if you feed that, because it's not quite high enough in protein, and also the calcium is really high, so it's going to calcify the kidneys, and it's very unlikely they'll ever lay an egg in their life if you feed them this layer feed the whole way through. So be sure to be feeding your layers based on their nutrient requirements and their age and stage of production. So So your average laying hen or poultry in general are going to eat for their energy requirements. She does not care how much minerals are in her feed. She does not care how much protein is in there. She is eating based on what her energy requirements are. And her energy requirements are going to change based on temperature. And that's essentially what this slide is going to be explaining to you. And I understand, depending on how many birds you have, if you just have 15 laying hens, it's going to be hard to change the feed based on how much they're eating and the temperatures outside. I do understand that, but there are some things on farm that we can do to kind of manipulate and play with the protein levels. So during the winter, so your colder temperatures, which is on your far left side, the temp in degrees Fahrenheit, as you can see, as the temperature decreases, their feed intake is going to increase because they're trying to eat more feed because they need more energy and more calories to keep their body warm. So that's going to affect the amount of protein that is going to be in that diet. And then on the opposite end of that, as temperatures increase, they don't need quite as much feed because they don't need quite as much energy because their bodies don't have to work as hard to stay warm. Quite the opposite. So that's going to affect how much feed they're going to eat, and that's going to affect how much protein they get. So a chicken needs on average 21 grams of protein to lay an egg. So that's how the protein and the energy are related. So if you have your standard 16 or 17% layer ration, and let's say it is 30 degrees outside, that's quite cold. One of the ways that you can handle her increased energy requirements is by feeding a scratch grain. And a scratch grain is just going to be whole grain, or cracked grain, one of the two. So that could be like whole or cracked corn, wheat, any of those is fine. You can throw out a little scratch grain for your birds to help with their energy requirements in the winter. And another thing that I want to mention on this slide is the importance of knowing how much your birds are eating too. So on average, they're going to eat about 1/4 pound per day, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. But again, her feed intake is changing usually based on the temperature outside. So as I mentioned a second ago, tracking your feed consumption and knowing how much your layer is eating per day is going to be really helpful for understanding kind of what's going on in her life when you're not paying much or whenever you're not around. So if on average they'll be eating about 1/4 pound per day. If they're eating a little bit more, and it might suggest that she's eating more because it's cold outside and she's trying to make her body a little bit warmer. So another reason it's important to know how much she's eating is it will help understand any possible problems. So if you're having an issue with your lay rate, one of the first things that I'm going to ask you if you come to me for help is, what is she eating and how much is she eating? So if she's not quite eating enough, maybe there's a reason that she's not eating her feed as well. Maybe she's kicking out certain grains because there might be some kind of like toxin associated with it. So understanding how much she's eating and paying attention to what she's eating is going to help you understand better what's going on with her egg production if you're seeing any issues. And I understand that tracking feed consumption can be a little bit different or maybe a little bit difficult, but just having, even if just an estimate, is going to be beneficial. So say you have 28 laying hens that are going through roughly 50 pounds of feed in 7 days. From that, we can figure out that they're eating roughly 26 or 0.26 pounds of feed per day, which is about average. So knowing how much feed you're going through is going to be really beneficial for any kind of problems you may be seeing. Another common topic that I've been talking about with producers is fermenting. It's been pretty popular. So hens do tend to eat fermented feed a little bit more aggressively. I don't quite understand why they do that, but they do. And they do also seem to eat feed a little bit better whenever it's been when it's wet. One of the big benefits, I think, of fermenting feed is that it encourages hens to eat the fines. And the fines are often where a lot of the vitamins and minerals are. So like the vitamin and mineral premixes are often quite fine, and they tend to fall to the bottom of the trough if you're feeding a complete feed or a non-pelleted feed especially. So that's one of the big benefits of fermenting. So if it's something that you're interested in, it can be beneficial. It can help with your egg production. I know that there have been a couple of interesting podcasts done on it. Mike Badger did on his Pastured Poultry Talk, did an interesting podcast on fermenting feed that I would definitely look into if that's something you're interested in doing. But a couple of things to keep in mind with fermenting feeds is that it does take time. You need about 48 hours to get a good ferment on your feed. And also because of adding water, it can be a little bit on the messier side. So in terms of management, that could be a little extra to think about also. So, but fermenting feed, I think there has been some benefit, and I know that there are some people who really like fermenting their feed. So if it works out for you, I think that's great. Um, you just need to make sure that you have the time and the equipment to do so and to ferment it properly. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about water because, again, water is a very important nutrient. We can't talk about feed without talking about water because water drives your feed consumption. The water that you're offering should always be clean, it should always be fresh, and it should always be available. In terms of cleanliness, making sure that you clean out your waters regularly every other day. Whenever you notice them start to get kind of gross, just clean them out. It's going to save you and your poultry. So, a layer without water for 24 hours may take as long as 24 days to recover from her production. So, it can force her to go into a molt, it can decrease your feed consumption, and it can decrease your egg production as well. So water is extremely important, especially for layers. If you have nipple waters for your birds, just you can go in and check regularly to make sure that they're getting the water. So please make sure they have water. I know when it's cold, it's hard to keep fresh water in front of them because it does tend to freeze, but it's very, very important for their egg production. It's also important to make sure you have enough waters for your birds and water space. For layers, it's roughly 30 birds per the fount waters, the red plus on waters, or 3 inches of linear or straight waters for your layers. Making sure that they can all get to it is really important because water is going to drive feed consumption, and water is also going to help with your lay rate. Extremely important. Okay, that is the course on laying hens. A little bit of information. A couple of things that I really want you to take away is that a laying hen is going to eat based on her energy requirements, and she is going to eat on average 1/4 pound of feed per day. And that number is more specific to the red sex lynx than it is to your bigger, hardier birds. But it's a good rough number to keep in the back of your mind. And if you're seeing issues, um, that's going to help troubleshoot a little bit of those problems.